We're joined here on the Managing Violence podcast by return guest, great friend of the show, host of mine in the UK, fourth Dan, British Combat Karate, project manager for FairFight in India, all round good egg, fantastic representative of violence prevention and management in the UK, Miss Mary Stevens. Mary, good to see you again.
What an introduction. Hi, Joe. It's brilliant to see you back where you should be in your podcasting chair.
In a dark room with no friends.
This is where the world needs you. Suck it up.
It's where I'm needed. Away from other humans with a microphone, apparently. Thank you. It's a lot of fun being back and just setting up some interviews, and really happy that you wanted to come back and do a show. And I'm pretty happy about the topic we've got today, which is what you should know before teaching women's self-defense. And you and I have had some conversation about this over the past couple of weeks while we've been putting this together. And fair warning, you may get your jimmies rustled. There may be some feathers flying. I'm actually going to do my best on this one to be both interviewer, even though I agree with most of what you say. I'm also going to be playing devil's advocate a little bit as well, because I think there's a utility in being able to ask some of the questions I know will come up in the comment section. So maybe we'll just go. We'll just sort of. I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But I guess maybe. We've obviously done a whole episode together. We talked about your background. Can you give us maybe just a 30-second snapshot for those who don't want to go back and watch the previous interview? Just your journey in martial arts and violence prevention.
That's a great opportunity for me to make up some complete nonsense and have people wonder. But broadly speaking, I'm a female martial arts instructor. I came into martial arts relatively late in life, having been a school teacher before. I have a particular interest in the vulnerable because I figured out that the karate that I had learned was not effective for self-defense, and that sent me into a big journey researching the differences between martial arts and self-defense, which is one of your particular specialisms. So I learned a lot from your podcast, and from that have found some awesome individuals with whom to train. No doubt whose names will probably pop up during the course of our discussion. So I love karate. I love traditional karate. I love effective karate also. I have kind of become a practical karate instructor as opposed to what we would refer to as a more 3K karate instructor, which is a whole different subject. But yeah, self-protection, personal safety for vulnerable demographics, children and women particularly are my specialisms.
Awesome. And of course, the projects you've been doing in India, I don't want to cheapen those by trying to give a short summary. Go back and listen to the last episode we did. We talked for like nearly an hour just about those projects. So go back and listen to that. If you want to listen to a really awesome person doing really awesome work for people who really need the help, go back and listen to those episodes and donate. There's always money required when you're trying to help vulnerable people who can't afford the help without donations. So we won't make this a whole plug for that, but since it came up, so I'm going to open a can of worms.
Go ahead. Bring it on.
I think most of the instructors on this that listen to the show, and I know the demographics based on listener surveys and the analytics and so on, we get male listenership there's actually a higher female representation than there used to be. I think because we started having more female guests, which is something I always wanted to do in the first place. I just wasn't aware of who to have on the show. But we're still, I think, around about the 80% male mark, right? And now, obviously, not all those people are instructors, but I would say from experience, if we start talking about the real violence prevention and management world, as we call it, or the reality-based world, or the more sort of serious violence focused, not necessarily recreational martial arts world, we do see that the vast majority of instructors are male. And I think that's just a general observation. And you'd argue that maybe the majority of students that are training in those dojos are also male, but there's an awful lot of women that are obviously drawn to learning something to keep themselves safe. Why do we stuff it up? How do we get this wrong? So maybe I'll just ask you from your perspective first, as a female who wanted to learn, and what was your first experience and how did it all play out?
Oh, damn. Okay. So, what was my first experience? My first experience was that I didn't go into martial arts because I wanted to defend myself.
Okay.
So that is maybe a slightly different demographic, isn't it? Because I just thought karate was really cool, and I wanted to do that cool stuff. And I wanted my kids to learn it, but I wanted my kids to learn it because I wanted them to defend themselves. So there was a definite difference in between what my expectation was. Um, I mean, you've met me. You know that I don't give off the protect me kind of vibes generally. And I was interesting. I was thinking about this as well because it sort of, for me, in a way, bridges the gap between me and male instructors to an extent. Is that I don't look like a I'm like 6 foot tall. I'm loud and come across as somebody you don't really want to fuck around with. And that kind of counts me out of a lot of target. It can make me a target for sure, but for the most part, I'm not the kind of female that gets picked on generally. So that for me wasn't a primary motivation in joining a martial arts class. For a lot of women, it is, and they're sorely disappointed because it certainly doesn't deliver what it claims to say on the packet.
So we from that point of view, then, when you did start getting interested in the more, I guess, practical violence prevention side, so we're starting to talk about prevention, we're talking about de-escalation, we're talking about the realities of violence as opposed to martial arts for the sake of a recreational martial art or a practice of a historical art or whatever sporting art, whatever else you're into for any reason. Um, where do you think are the gaps that maybe let's start with well-intentioned instructors. So I think the vast majority of people that at least are listening to this show that have gone out of their way to listen to back catalogs that are trying to be better at what they do, have all the best of intentions. What are some of the things that, let's say in particular, male instructors tend to miss about training women and teaching women self-defense classes?
Okay, well, for starters, let's categorize these male instructors. Because in my experience, which is now relatively extensive, they broadly fall into three categories: men who want to teach women self-defense. Firstly, the predators, not just sexual predators, although of course there's lots of examples of those, but also resource predators. They're just like, I teach martial arts, I want to make some money, I'm going to run a women's self-defense course because that'll bring me in some money, without really thinking serious. And then they just teach them. We have one not far away from us that drives my colleague Chris completely mad because he'll be like, I'm going to go and teach self-defense. And then, he's a taekwondo instructor. He's teaching like head kicks and all sorts of random shit that is of absolutely no value whatsoever and has no kind of preventative benefit whatsoever. So resource predators, definitely, I'm afraid sexual predators are out there as well. I have seen leading martial arts instructors saying, hey, if you want to get a girlfriend, it's a great thing to do to set up and run a self-defense course because you're going to have, basically vulnerable women to pick on, which is mind-numbingly depressing and awful. So yeah, category one, the predators. Category two, the white knights. And this is where I stand to offend, quite a lot of people, because some guys want to come and teach women self-defense because they want to be heroes, and they want to feel valuable. And they often have really good intentions, but they haven't necessarily done the work. And again, they're often teaching stuff that they know, but is not necessarily, and they may even be well researched in like self-defense generally. And have done their time as fans of Jeff Thompson and all of those other people that we've talked about before who are icons of the self-defense world, but who aren't necessarily teaching the kind of stuff that's appropriate for a 15-year-old girl or a vulnerable older woman who's being picked on by her son, or any of those other kind of very real situations which might occur. So, and they often get very butthurt if you point out that they don't know what they're talking about, because they like to feel good about what they're teaching and so on. And then category three is the allies. And there are an increasing number of these, the guys that are prepared to do the work. Obviously, I also instruct for 500 Rising. I'm a licensed instructor with them. and training to continue working with that organization, which is a phenomenal organization. People should go back and listen to your interview with Tammy Yard-McCracken, and her mission towards women's self-defense. And those guys are awesome. They really get it. And they have, really put the yards in to understand male privilege, and how they have to kind of deconstruct a few things before they can effectively. I would absolutely. Men can teach women self-defense. Men can be phenomenal at teaching women self-defense, and I've met some fantastic self-defense instructors out there who are male, who are teaching great stuff to women. But it doesn't just happen. There has to be like motivation, research, and some serious self-awareness before that can be possible.
Yeah, all right. This is my first interjection as a devil's advocate here, because I can see the YouTube click off rate already climbing, as someone just identified as one of those groups and took offense to it. Can we just get this out of the way before anyone says not all men are predators, not all men are this? You said something fantastic on Facebook just the other day about the not all men thing. Can you just restate that in your own words before I paraphrase you here about why the not all men are predators thing doesn't really need to be stated?
Well, so the exact thing that I said was in one of the particular areas of research that is very engaging is the risk assessment around domestic abuse. Okay, and the stages is like so, and the way that the media reports murder suicides, often being like a guy at the end of a relationship would rather kill his ex and himself than move on and allow her to live her life, etc. So not all men, obviously not all men, but the point that I was making was that women are being killed by men. Okay, it's one every 3 days here in the UK, a woman is killed by her partner or her ex-partner, and that's that's not unusual for this country. The threat to women is overwhelmingly men. Sometimes people push back at that and go, but the threat that men are being attacked as well. I'm like, yes, men are being attacked by men also. You men, you have a violence problem. So please, then you get the white knights that come in and go, oh, we're going to fix this for women. I'm like, why don't you try and fix the men first? Because I can't fix the men. Yep. All I can do is try and educate and protect the women. That's kind of what I'm qualified to do. But you guys, instead of being like, oh, don't worry, little lady, we'll help you, talk to your brothers, talk to your cousins, talk to your friends and be like, dude, stop harassing that woman. Please don't make these sexist jokes, or don't creep women out anyway. So yeah, the point is you get pushback if you say women are being killed by men. You get not all men. You don't get not all women. Well, obviously not all women are being killed. There's plenty of women out there not being killed. I'm currently not being killed. Yay me. You're currently not killing anybody. Good for you. Well done.
On camera.
Oh yeah, no. Well, I mean, obviously, in terms of the podcast, you're always killing it. But
I don't know if it's appropriate to put in a joke right there as we're talking about domestic homicide, but I appreciate the sentiment. But I think that, okay, this is just the first one to get it out of the way. Mary does not think that if you teach women self-defense, you are a predator or a white knight. You could well be an ally. More than likely, if you're listening to this show and you clicked on this episode, you're more likely to fall into the better camp. But I think anyone who's been around the martial arts and has attended a lot of women's self-defense seminars or is aware of the people running them, you probably know if you can put away the fact that you might have just been triggered because you wondered if whether she's talking about you, that you've seen people that are either they're just money gouging because it's topical and because there's fear, and it's a great thing to be able to sell right now. So we've seen that. I know you've at least heard stories, if not seen people directly prey upon vulnerable people in their classes, even if they think they're just being supportive, and that just ends up somehow being a relationship, which always feels really weird and gross. But we've all seen that if you've been around for a while. And we've also seen the people that get really cause driven and they're going to save everybody, but they end up just sort of mansplaining female experiences, which ends up being more the white knight territory than the actual ally territory. And I do think that the white knights have a little bit more potential to grow and evolve into a proper ally once they become self-aware. But it's, if you've never really been around it, you haven't had people like Mary and Tammy and Pamela and others that we've had on the podcast sort of in your sphere of influence, you may not realize just sometimes how ignorant we can sound. And certainly if I was going to go back and talk to 23-year-old me that was running women's self-defense classes as a 6'4", 120 kilogram bouncer, I'm certain there'd be a lot of things I would say to myself then. I was probably much closer to a white knight than I was to an ally, even though I thought I was doing the right things. So anyway, that's the first interjection. If you feel the need to go in the comments and say not all men, we've addressed that. Okay, you're probably one of the good ones. Although if it's still bothering you, maybe think about that for a little bit. All right. That aside, so one of the things I've heard you say a few times when we've spoken, I think when I've heard you teaching, and maybe even on other interviews, is you said something about women aren't just small men. So what does that mean to you as an instructor? Like, what do we need to take from that?
Right. So the phrase "women are not little men." I originally came across in the fantastic work by Caroline Criado Perez, which is called Invisible Women, which is a comprehensive kind of, again, being a woman with an opinion, it's had to be incredibly well researched. It's a kind of data-driven expose of the patriarchy. So she looks at the number of different ones, there's so many ways in which women are disadvantaged by structural issues. So women are not little men applies to medical research. It applies to crash test dummies. It applies to the great one that I came back across the other day, the Australian Army, allowed women to have a 28-inch stride instead of a 30-inch stride and reduce pelvic fractures. Because until then, the women were expected to march exactly the same stride distance as the men. And amazingly, when they stopped that, the apocalypse didn't happen. It was okay to allow the women to march in a way that was more appropriate for their bodies. And in terms of self-defense, women are not little men it's a really useful concept because women experience violence differently. It comes to us in different ways, shapes and forms. We have a lot less social violence, not none, obviously, just protecting myself. Sometimes women will, pick on someone and bottle them in the street because they're, pissed and angry and so on. But it's much less likely to happen to women for lots of reasons, some of which we talked about in your very excellent Managing Violence course that we did in the UK a couple of years ago. Let's have some more of that. But it's really important to consider that a woman is constructed differently. So she's biologically different. Like, for example, I have 50% less upper body strength than my partner. We weigh roughly the same. We both train hard, but he has more muscle mass than me. That's just normal. And when you are training women, you have to take these things into account. You have to take into account the context, the environment. What is the likely threat? The number of people that set off to teach women self-defense, they don't think about what are the actual threats. One of the things that Chris and I do in our VPAM sessions is immediately try to get people to consider what is their own personal threat profile. I mean, a lot of people do that, of course, and it's not an original idea. But if you are launching into teaching women self-defense and you're talking about, when it all kicks off down the chip shop on a Friday night, then you're not really thinking about the reality of her experiencing creeps in a nightclub in a way that things can... One of the things that I really noticed is the way that a situation can suddenly go south when somebody's already in your range. Range is a really important thing in women's self-defense that's often very poorly taught because, people start to think about fence and that kind of thing. Well, mostly when it goes south in women's self-defense, they're already well inside range, for a variety of different contextual reasons. And so, you're not looking at the same kind of starting point. You're also, for the most part, she's being attacked by somebody that she knows, somebody that she loves, chances are, somebody that she has a complex power dynamic with often. And that makes things really, really fucked up in a way that for the standard nice and easy, let's talk about stranger danger. Well, let's really not talk about stranger danger because it's such a small risk. All the people that, again, the resource predators that capitalized on the Sarah Everard murder, like, yeah, what if it's a bad police officer off duty and he's doing, all right, what are the chances of that compared to it's her boyfriend, it's her boss, it's her ex turning up out of the blue? So Women Are Not Little Men comprises a whole range of like physical and psychological contextual aspects.
I think even just in the very micro context of physical self-defense, if we're thinking about defensive techniques, which is obviously a very small subject matter in the overall violence prevention and management kind of picture, but even just with that, the way that women are attacked is typically different the way men attacked. The way that men attack women is different to how men attack men on average, in terms of just the mechanisms. It's much more about dominance, it's much more about control, it's much more about intimidation as opposed to damage. So you'll see a lot more grabs, a lot more pulling, and a lot more changing of height structures, and hence pulling the hair to bring the head down so that you have a more a dominance game going on, or holding someone down seated in a seat, not being concerned about being struck back. But those kinds of things, because it asserts dominance, which is not necessarily how we tend to do conflict with other men. Even in that social setting, even in that nightclub setting, it's still different.
Yeah, and one of the really interesting things is when you put men into that situation. So one of the things I like to do in some of my karate for women self-defense type vibe things is like, obviously if your hair is being grabbed, then you're experiencing a level of like postural disruption that makes you're fighting from a very compromised position, as well as it's intensely scary. And it can be quite difficult to replicate that for guys. But I have this little hack where, so I put on those head guards on a guy, like the grill ones, but you can get a good, because you can't replicate this by grabbing like a collar or anything like that, because the way that the hair is grabbed is like really, really unpleasant and difficult, because once your neck is gone, I mean, full well how that affects your balance and your ability to recover and to fight from that position. So just getting a guy to, like, because funnily enough, a lot of the guys that I work with don't have any hair, or are kind of somewhat disadvantaged in that kind of.
It's a common element. It's a common element. Thankfully, beards have come back in the last 20 years or so, so we've been able to sort of compensate a little bit. But now you're a stereotype if you're bald and tattooed and have a beard, so you can't win.
Yeah, and a lot of the guys I have like experimented with this quite a lot. Of the guys don't have enough beard that you can really like rake the head around by getting into it. You've got to like sensibly. It would be difficult. It would be difficult to disrupt your posture using your beard.
That's also why I shave my head as well, just to make sure no one pulls my hair. It's purely by choice. Yeah. Back on topic though. I do think and these are just the little micro differences, right? That maybe don't occur to you if you're. Yeah, again, to steal a phrase I took from you initially, for bouncers by bouncers, right? That are a whole like social violence, young people fighting each other. It's almost exclusively a male problem, and if you're just training that because that's what you learned, then that's cool, but it's not for everyone. It doesn't help 55-year-old Anne who's worried about being harassed at the bus stop after she finishes her long days as an accountant. That doesn't help her. Your bouncing experience is irrelevant, which is another thing I've heard you say so many times. And as a former bouncer, I don't think I'll move beyond that. But I mean, that was my platform that I started teaching from. But you've got to move beyond that. You've got to learn other people's realities if you want to help those people. And so much of that, I think, to something that I know that you're very big on, is you've got to be humble, and you've got to have legitimate humility to come in and say, I know nothing about your world, and I know nothing about how you see the world, but I want to help however I can. Teach me what I can do to help you, and tell me how I can assist. Yeah.
And this is where the white knights really do stand to become allies, as you say, because if you come at it from the point of view of, well, what are you scared of? And what do we know will help with that? Instead of what happens most of the time is that they just reconfigure the reality to fit their solution, which is a very common thing in self-defense. Is like, I mean, one that I've heard where the BJJ wanted to make their stuff relevant. And it was like, oh, well, you're running away from this guy, and then, you trip and you fall, and he lands in your guard, and then you do. All right, okay. Yeah, that's definitely...
Yeah,
it's one.
Maybe. Seems
Yeah, but
yeah, yeah,
it's a stretch. It's a
yeah.
stretch. So
It's a
for a
stretch.
lot
Yeah,
of
but we've got so many more techniques if that happens.
yeah, exactly. And that's the reality that they want to work from. That's their starting point. So you're kind of looking at like what are your starting points? So not only do you need to try and learn about the reality of the person that you've got in front of you, but then you also have to then realize what you don't know and figure out what then is going to work for that person, and what's appropriate for them, and also then wind it back, wind it back down the timeline as to, if they're facing overpowering odds, at what point can the education that we provide them give them more choices? Let's work on their boundary setting, let's work on their body language, let's work on their personal safety in terms of the journeys that they're making and the habits that they have. Let's look at what works for prevention, so that we're not dealing with the overpowering odds of, four big dudes and some cable ties.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a fantastic point. I remember being asked when I was like, I don't know, very young, early in my journey. I was teaching a seminar, and someone said, "What would you do if someone hit you with a baseball bat?" And I said, "I'd probably bleed, I guess." I mean, like, I've been hit with a baseball bat. Like, I don't really know what you want me to do at that point. like things. At what
Yes.
point was I around the person with a baseball bat? Did I annoy someone who happened to be carrying a baseball bat? Did I make this person angry 3 weeks ago and they've been stewing on it? Now they're waiting for me with a baseball bat. Like, there were some things before the baseball bat that we possibly could have looked at rather than just what's your defense after you've been hit with a baseball bat. I don't know that I'll have one, to be completely honest, and I don't know if I've ever learned one that I think would be reliable. So yeah, I think that's really the prevention piece, right? And it actually leads to a nice question I'd like to get your take on, because I do feel like I've been guilty of mansplaining this a little bit over the years, where people will criticize an instructor for teaching women how to be safer, by kind of indicating that might be victim blaming, or we shouldn't have to teach women how to be safer. We shouldn't have to teach women how to check their drinks, not leave their drinks unattended. We shouldn't have to teach women to avoid these certain areas at these times, or to run these background checks on their new partners. That shouldn't be the woman's responsibility. We should be educating men instead. Now, I've got my thoughts on that. I'd like to hear what your take is on that, if you've heard that rhetoric and how you feel about it.
Yeah, that's rhetoric we hear all the time, like all the time. Like we're teaching women self-defense is victim blaming, and it is absolutely bullshit, because it's very disempowering. Obviously, it would be great if we were living in a world where men were not killing women, we're not attacking women, we're not trying to control women, we're not coercively controlling women, etc. That is not the world we live in. The world is actually worse now. There's a whole big heap of stuff going on the internet, and the rise of kind of entitled toxic masculinity and all the rest of that, where there are men savagely attacking men who are allies, for example. If you say something positive, or if you're trying to be open to the idea that sexist jokes are a bad thing, then you're going to get called woke or simp or cuck or any of those other things that are commonly being used at the moment. So, do you lock your car? Do you put your seatbelt on? Do you lock your house? All of these basic things are like, yes, well, people shouldn't rob my house. Oh, yeah, I'm not going to lock my house, because if I'm not, I shouldn't have to lock my house. Yeah, fuck that. That's just bollocks. So if we can get into a world where there is no crime and people don't have to, do bad stuff to deal with their, life situation, great. But we're not in a utopia. And while we're not there, then let's educate people to be as safe as they possibly can.
Spot on. It's pretty much exactly what I tell people, probably less eloquently than that. Is that I don't consider it victim blaming; it's victim empowering. These are the people that are often the victims. I want to try and empower them to not be victims. And while we absolutely should be fighting on the other front as well, to educate the coming generations of men about some of these toxic habits and rituals and ways of living and so on that we're dealing with, we absolutely have to be having that battle at the same time, but it doesn't mean we have to just go, well, you know what? No one gets to defend themselves until we've got this 4 generations of work done, and we'll see where we land. Right? That's not going to help. So, and like a big sort of like slap in the face for me, I guess, when I got sort of hit with this is like, I'm thinking about my daughters. I've got 4 daughters. I'm not going to not train them because they shouldn't have to defend themselves. Like, well, yeah, there's a lot of things I shouldn't have to have insurance because people shouldn't burn down my house. But I'm glad I've got insurance in case it ever happens. So yeah, look, I think we're on the same page there. I just want to call that one out because I know that one. I'm trying to anticipate all the different things people will argue with and try to have the arguments in micro so I can just refer them back to a timestamp. So
well, let's contribute one to that as well. So
please.
For that, a woman should be able to wear what she wants, go where she wants, etc. Yeah, 100% true. You should be able to go out wearing a short skirt and high heels and come back drunk at 3 o'clock in the morning. And people shouldn't take advantage of that, but they will.
Yep.
They will. And so if you're my student, I'm saying you can make the choices but you need to make those choices knowingly, and you need to mitigate.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're going to go out and get drunk, then who's watching your back? Let's have a, peer support network going on.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to be wearing super high heels that are really disabling, then, pack some handbag shoes with you. If you want to do X, Y, and Z, you need to have a plan B, and you need to be able to protect yourself in the knowledge that there are people out there that will take advantage of you, and not because people who are not vulnerable in any way, in terms of their clothing or the time of day or any of those circumstantial things. People will still get attacked because predators will have particular reasons and will be driven by whatever's going on in that opportunity in the moment, etc. But we can mitigate, and we should educate how to mitigate. And that, again, is not accusing people and saying, well, if you are out in a short skirt and high heels at 3 o'clock in the morning, pissed out of your head, it's your fault. It's still not your fault. But you need to know that there are risks attached to that. And that's, I'm sure, what you would also teach your daughters.
100%. Actually, I had a pastor a few years ago tell me that he used the line, and I've taken it in so many different contexts since then. He said, yeah, God grants you freedom of choice, but not freedom from consequence. And I'm like, oh, I like that. You can choose whatever you want, but every choice has a consequence. And you are a participant in your own safety. And you can decide what risks you're prepared to take, what mitigations you're prepared to put in place, how much you're willing to sacrifice, what you want to do for safety or security or anything else. And everyone has a right to make that choice for themselves. But if you are educated about the risk you are taking, then you make that educated decision, not just utopia, blind bliss, this is how things should be, and I'll make a decision based upon that, because that's just not the world we live in. So yeah. And look, I think coming back to our point about the difference between teaching men, teaching women, and self-defense, I think someone asked me, may have even been on a previous episode, but it really made me think, was that, when was the last time you walked to your car at night after being out and felt fear? And for me, it's not a very common thing. Like it might be like if I know I'm in a really bad place, or if there's something going on, or there's just things are unstable, but it's certainly an anomaly. And then the realization that for a lot of women, that's literally every single time they're out at nighttime walking to a car, there is an element of fear. That in its own right, it's a game changer. That's a context changer for the people that you are training.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't not drop in a book recommendation on that, because it's an excellent book. For those of you listening, this is called Bad Men, and it's by a guy called David Buss, who's a phenomenal writer. Bits of this is a kind of research-based analysis of the differences between men and women, but also understanding like the consequences for women of like male impulses and violence. So why men are like the rape in war, sexual assault, all of that kind of stuff, why that is a thing. and how kind of the underpinning and fear of that drives a lot of female decisions and behaviors. And also understanding why a lot of the time men don't really get that in terms of the lower level stuff, the harassment and so on. Men don't identify with that biological primal fear in the same kind of way because they don't feel physically threatened as, often like at all, but generally as frequently as women for whom that is never a zero thing, pretty much,
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously we're generalizing here massively. There'll be men out there for various reasons who may feel that fear or threatened, maybe through past trauma or just something to do with their lifestyle, their appearance, whatever. They feel like they're more at risk. And so there'll be women that don't feel that way for whatever reason. And that's fine too. But it is, again, we're talking about generalizations here because we're talking about who is the average person walking into your dojo or walking into your academy that wants to learn how to defend themselves, and what do we need to know to be able to do that better. We've touched a little bit on context. I just want to expand upon that a little bit more. So let's say we've got a let me just pick, not pick on traditional martial arts. Let's say we've got a combat sport gym that wants to teach some women self-defense things because they're worried about some of the incidents that are happening in the neighborhood, and they legitimately want to help, and they want to put on some women's only classes to create a safer, more comfortable training environment for women that might want to come in. What are some of the context things, like if you could kind of give people like a billboard of like, here, do this and don't do this? What are the big things that a well-intentioned ally in training might need to know to be able to do this better than they otherwise would?
Yeah. So one of the first things that I would recommend relates to this and to your previous point about people's traumatic past experiences is to make sure that you're adopting a trauma-informed approach. Particularly when you're bringing people into a class, you need to be able to set a context, an environment that enables them to feel safe and comfortable. This is a massive thing from Pam Armitage, obviously, who has the most like Billy Basics approach to do all of these very practical things, and it will really help you create an environment in which people can be comfortable to learn, because people have to feel safe in order to learn, and a lot of the time you risk re-traumatizing people if you are bringing them in and like aggressively teaching them break defenses. Then that's going to be a problem. And the bottom line is people who come to a self-defense class have a reason to be there. So often for most people, there's past trauma anyway that you need to know. That I've been in some rooms where you're just like, damn, there is a lot of trauma in this room. And you can't just gallop over that because it's dangerous for the people involved. So be aware that people that come to your class have a reason to be there. And they probably won't feel comfortable telling you what that reason is, because it might be very private. It might be something they haven't come to terms with, and it might be really, really fucking traumatic. So that's not generally what they're going to lead with, but they do want your help. So you kind of have to not let them down. So you need to reassure them that they're safe and that you're not going to put pressure on them to do stuff they don't feel comfortable doing. So those are really important vibes to set. And that can be difficult for the traditional martial artist who is used to being the boss in their own room. So the power dynamic, please.
Sorry, Mary, I just want, there's something that you just said that I really want to make sure gets emphasized, because there's something that I've struggled with in the past, coming from being a combat sports coach and a kind of I guess a harder style martial arts practitioner. The idea of not making someone do something they don't want to do, that's like kryptonite to an old school coach. Like, no, like you shouldn't want to do any of this. It all sucks, right? But come on, you can do it. Just give me one more. Like you can get in there. You can hit the pad. You can try this, and that works fine as someone who wants to be encouraged. But someone who's not even really sure if they want to be there, that just becomes overwhelming, and they'll shut down. They'll leave, and they'll be in tears, and you won't have any idea. And that person might go away and never train again anywhere, because that one experience, which was just you trying to encourage them, was really not sensitive to maybe who that person is. And that's a hard thing, right? Because you might have 30, 40 people on the mat, and you're trying to really get it right for every single person who's at way different stages in their journey. So I just want to emphasize that point, because I do know it's something that was a big sort of learning epiphany for me as I was going along with how I train people, especially in public seminars.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to facilitate them, and like and help them, like meet them where they are, or are you going to be like, this is how we do things. If you're not going to do it this way, you can fuck off, which is how a lot of places work, because they only have one way of teaching, and so they end up with only one type of student, pretty much. So it's a really important point, and it's another important difference, other than the techniques. It's another important difference in the way that people teach their martial arts and the way that people teach their self-defense. Should probably be different. I say should probably because now I increasingly teach my karate that way as well. It's full of woke shit, you wouldn't believe. Unbelievable.
But are you going to start your own style of woke karate and get a couple of extra downgrades along the way?
Oh yeah, no, I think that's going to be a shortcut for me for sure.
I think, yeah. I mean, you could just make stuff whatever. It's cool.
I think some tools would be good as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, we've got to move with the times. Sorry, I did interrupt. So we're talking about just being trauma informed, and what are some other things? I think you were on a roll, and I cut you off because I wanted to emphasize that point. Just other things that well-intentioned people that maybe don't have a lot of experience should be mindful of.
Yeah, so we talked about context. So I think it's really important early on to get a good risk. So people are very, very fearful of the non-physical. And, we all know that if you're teaching proper self-protection, then the physical needs to be a tiny part of it. And this is one thing that, they're not used to. But it's actually not that complicated to have discussions. And one of the things that works really well for me with teens, particularly when they're doing their risk assessment, is to this is a whole obviously teacher thing, is that I'll put them into little groups with a big, lots of pens and spreadsheets and giant post-it notes. I'm a big fan of giant post-it notes, and they're going to write down, like, you could say what places in this locality are the dangerous ones. It's often McDonald's for whatever reason. Stuff kicks off at McDonald's. Where you can train stations, and their local knowledge will then come into play. Or what are the times of day that are risky? All of these different things that will come out for them. But what happens, which is quite magical, is that if they're working in a group and talking to each other, they will say stuff they wouldn't say in front of the group, and that stuff can be incredibly fucking important. Like, this is where, when we're talking about like boundary setting, where we've had like a 15-year-old come out with being touched by her boss, and over a period of like 9 months. Which she would never have said out, just put her hand up and say in front of the group. But this is the stuff that they need protecting from. And if you're not comfortable dealing with that, you shouldn't be teaching this stuff, because that girl is at threat from this creep. And maybe, she's not going to say that unless you facilitate the drawing in of information from the group that is then going to help you problem solve with them. Because that's kind of your job. You're not there to just teach them to power slap the pad, or any of the other number of things that could be useful, can be empowering to feel, to experience the power in their bodies. That's a good thing in itself. But where's the context, and what are you trying to do? Are you trying to help these people that you have in front of you today? Then you need to listen to them. That's where you have to start.
Yeah, and I think just to throw the opposite side on that too, it's not, you don't need that information to be able to help somebody. You don't have to force someone to share something they're not willing to share with you. Like, you could have a relationship with that student for a decade and they won't feel comfortable talking about the thing they went through that brought them in the door, and that's fine. Some people just, like, sometimes the best therapy for people is just to learn and feel like their body is capable of something positive, and just to feel like they can be powerful, they can do something, even if they never do a scenario that looks like their traumatic event. And to be honest, probably be better for them if they don't in some cases. Other people do need to go through that crucible and have a win in that scenario so they can move on. It's so individual, and you have to be willing to be led by the student, which is hard for a lot of instructors to hear. But you need to be led by your student if you're trying to help someone. It's therapy, right? It's, in a way, it's we're providing a form of weird psychosocial physiological kind of therapy for some people, and other people just want to get in there and sweat and not talk to you, and that's fine too. So
yeah. And at the end of the day, it's very important, like, we're not therapists. We need to have places where we point to people in the
For
direction
sure.
of somebody that will really help.
Oh yeah, don't get into talk therapy if you're not trained to do that.
Yeah.
I just mean that
Yeah.
martial arts can be therapeutic for people. I think it's probably the point I'm trying to say. But,
and it's such an important point about people volunteering things. Like they don't have to volunteer things. You can still help people. That people will come at things maybe obliquely, or they'll just benefit from being there, and they benefit from the experiences of others. That's all 100% true. We would never be people under pressure to do that. And we always ask permission to share. Like if they've come up with something that I think is valuable for the whole group, do you mind if we talk about that more generally? And sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Obviously, it's down to them. And often they'll go through the whole session without saying anything, and then when you're packing up at the end, boom, there they are. They pop up with this experience that they didn't want to talk about, but they really want to talk about with you. Yeah. And sometimes they want to know what they did wrong, which is where I always come back to Randy King's "You Can't Survive Wrong."
Yep. There's so many times now at the end of a session that I've done, even if it's just a couple of hours with a group that I'll never see again. During that packing up the computer, and there's always that one person who's waiting for everyone else to have asked their questions before they come forward. And some of the shit that I've heard in that time has been some of the heaviest stuff I've ever heard of. This awful, traumatic, like horror movie stuff that people have been through. And that one of actually an interview I'm doing next week, I'm having Matt Thornton back on the podcast, and Matt's written a great book called The Gift of Violence, and very research driven book on violence. We're going to be talking about that, but I'm just re-listening to it now, or I've read it, but I'm listening to it now to prep for that interview. And so one of the stats, don't quote me on this because I was listening while I was doing other things, but I think something like 1 in 7 women in the United States have been sexually assaulted, like as a child or as an adult. And that's, I mean, if you've got more than 7 women in your class, think about that. And there's no real hard data on whether they're a victim of sexual assault is more or less likely to seek out martial arts. But I would say that there's a potential that we're overrepresented within our cohorts. So if you don't know that anyone has been, just assume there's probably at least a couple if you've got a decent female cohort. So we should be, again, trauma informed. If we're all doing it right, it doesn't matter who has and who hasn't. One thing we could talk about this for like 2 hours. So I am conscious. I've got a couple of real points I want to get to, because I know this will ruffle some people as well. But talk to me about unconscious sexism.
Oh, fucking hell. All right. Yeah, I mean, that kind of circles us back to the idea of male privilege and patriarchy, which is two things that immediately will have a lot of people like...
I'm not privileged.
Just, of course you're not. No, not in any way. If people haven't kind of... It's like, for me, when I was spending a lot of time studying racism, working in India as a tall white woman is a massive form of privilege. And the whole thing that we talk about a lot in 500 Rising, you are not your student, is such an important thing. I am not my student, particularly in India, where my student is poor, disempowered, still has to do what her dad tells her. There was one that was heartbreaking. We had a really good course running in Lucknow a couple of years ago, and we had fantastic attendance on the Saturday, and then on the Sunday the attendance was like dropped off massively, and we spent a little time trying to get those girls back in. They'd had a good day. It was an instructor training thing, and what had happened on the Sunday was that the dads were home and they wouldn't let them go, which was just a reality that you are not going out to do women's self-defense instructor training today. End of. I have a lot of privilege in the way that I operate. I know that when you look at women in authority, like immediately, most people don't realize how prejudiced they are against women in leadership. And this goes for women as well as for men. There's a fantastic research that's been done on women in authority. And I know that I have a few things that are an advantage to me. One is height. One is the fact that my voice is relatively low pitched, because women with higher pitched voices, it doesn't matter how sensible what the words are coming out of their mouth, some people are already not listening to them. women, if they are expressing an opinion, are more likely to be criticized for that opinion straight away, even by other women, than a man is with the same opinion. And, I don't have to prove anything with this. There's masses and masses amount of data which goes along with this. So it's really important to understand how unconscious sexism plays into this. And that, you need to listen to women's experiences and not dismiss them because they might not seem that bad to you. And that's another thing that the David Buss book is good for, is that what a man would consider to be a compliment to a woman can be perceived as a threat. The same thing. They're like, oh, you get that a lot with, oh, no, they're not, they're just paying you a compliment. Yeah, when you're receiving that as a smaller woman, maybe down the hierarchy, the power dynamics are really important there as well. It's very, very important to understand that there are lots of things that are more difficult for women just to get to a base level, to be taken seriously.
Yep.
So, go on.
So I was just going to say is that they're saying that men are worried that a woman will laugh at them or humiliate them, and women are worried that a man will kill them. And
Yeah.
I think it's very much our biology in a lot of ways. I mean we're biologically driven creatures, and that's just the reality of our species. That's always been the concern. But that's a privilege, right? That you're not worried touch wood, I'm never have to date again. But if I was going dating, I'm not worried that the woman that I am going on a date with may kill me. That's not something that really enters my mind unless there's some really big flashing red flags when I get there, right? Whereas that's something that is in the back of the mind for a lot of young women when they are dating, not even young women, but women when they're dating, is that, like, what if this guy's a psycho? What if I can't get away? Right? And that's just an ever-present risk assessment that has to be completed. And just because I'm not even going to play devil's advocate here, I'm actually just going to shoot down the devil straight away. Because I used to rebel against this idea of male privilege. I was like, yeah, I don't know, I've had to struggle for things. I had someone, a dear friend, sort of explain this to me bluntly, and she said, "Is there anything in your life that you didn't get any say in, that if it was different would make your life harder?" And if the answer is yes, you've got an element of privilege. So the fact that I was raised by two parents that stayed together and I had a relatively stable childhood, that's a hell of a privilege. The fact that I was born white in a country where I'm the majority, that's a privilege. The fact that I had no intellectual impediments that allowed me to do well in school, that allowed me access to a university, that made me employable, that allowed me to speak clearly, all these things are massive privileges. And I didn't really get much of a say in whether I got those or not. And yes, privilege allows you opportunity to work hard in certain directions and you can earn things beyond that, but there are people that didn't even have the same starting position as you. So it's not an indictment on you to say you have privilege. It's an awareness piece about what you have. You're playing the game on an easier difficulty setting than other people. And that's all it is. And if you acknowledge that, that's a good starting point. So if you're worried that you don't have privilege because your parents were poor, or your dog died when you were 6 or whatever, like, cool, not everything's perfect just because you've got a little bit of privilege, but there might be some things in your life that if they were different, things would have been even harder than what you had them. So yeah, that's just a reference point for the privilege thing, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's again a multitude of statistics on that. If a man and a woman turned in identical CV for a job, then the woman is 30% less likely to get called on for that job. These are very significant statistics that are, and it's important to have, as you say, to be aware of that. And if you feel like you're kicking against that and going, no, it's not a thing, then again, maybe women's self-defense might not be the right field for you.
Actually, one thing I just want to touch on with that, with the unconscious sexism, because I'm going through some notes you sent me beforehand, so I keep looking down at my phone to make sure I've hit the talking points I wanted to talk about. The jokes, the jokes that we make in training. So some of the things that we say that we have no ill intent, but we don't know how they're impacting people. And the one that stood out to me is that the funny protective prom dad. We sort of romanticize this idea of the dad with the shotgun, and I have heard it that many times because I'm a big guy and I'm tattooed, and I'm the managing violence guy, and I've got 4 daughters. Like, oh, but your daughter's boyfriends are not going to want to meet you in a dark alley. So, well, one, why are we waiting for them in a dark alley? And two, no, I want them like when they come time to date, I want to be a positive male role model in their lives because that's probably going to have more impact on them treating my daughters well than me terrifying them. Right? But these are the jokes we make, and I think in a lot of martial arts cultures or martial cultures, warrior cultures, whatever that passes for these days, there's this romanticization of the violent nomad or the fierce protector or the Thomas Shelby, the John Wick, the whatever archetype is in Hollywood at the moment. And we romanticize this when that would be a sociopath that you wouldn't want anywhere near your actual life. And we make jokes about it like it's something to be aspire towards. We don't do the same thing for women. Like, so anyway, I just want to any commentary on the jokes we make and things around that.
Oh yeah, so much, because I mean, we talked a little bit about protectors, didn't we? I mean, this is for the protectors.
Yep.
So where's the line there? Where's protecting and where's controlling? And it's all about the agency of the person that's involved with that. I was part of a very interesting discussion on Facebook a few months back where a guy was really upset. I can understand why he was upset. Really, good guy, lots of positive discussions with him about, women and self-defense and all the rest of that. But basically, a woman had been in a threatened position, and she had dealt with it herself, as opposed to the guy dealing with her stepping in. And I can't even remember where, maybe it was her dad, maybe it was her brother that was with her, but he was genuinely like hurt, offended, upset that the man in question hadn't like jumped in to reinforce, back up, etc. But here's the thing, she didn't ask him to, and she dealt with it herself. So there was some angsty discussion on there about what it is to be a man and what is your role as a protector. And women are not property. This is one of the most important things. Women are not property, and women should have agency. And you're going to go through this obviously a lot with your daughters, who are all fine, feisty young women. And I love watching your posts and Amanda's posts about them. You've brought up some awesome girls who are willing to speak their mind, who are full of like great influences, books and sport and all sorts of stuff going on there. They are sassy as hell, and that's going to be an exciting. It's going to be an exciting roller coaster for you, but you're doing a lot. That's brilliant. Because submissiveness, subservience, these are the qualities that get women picked on, and that's so difficult and important. And obviously, for some women that present as quite quiet. I think my son's girlfriend, she's awesome. She's a senior scientist working for the government. She's tiny and she's blonde, and she's not a pushy, loud kind of person. Her experience of daily life as a senior scientist is not going to be the same as a man who's had the same career path that she's had. It's not every single day. People like in that situation, their judgment is constantly being called into question, unless they're working with a very enlightened team of people. But you're still going to rub up against people whose automatic assumptions are going to be, she's a young blonde woman and she's going to be taken less seriously as a consequence to that. That's just true. Again, people might kick against that and go, oh, I don't think that's true. Well, you fucking try it then. You go and be a young, do the work to get to that position, and then see how that feels once you're actually there. It's so kind of circling back to what you were saying, that whole idea of like protection and control, masculinity and so on. These are the things that men need to wrestle with. I'm not here to solve that problem for you, Ducky.
Mm.
That's going to be a you thing, not a me thing, but give the women agency, and that's a good starting point.
Yeah, look, and I think that yeah, I got the Protector brand literally tattooed on me, and it risks becoming a little bit wanky in many ways. And I think Tommy Joe Moore, if you're listening to this podcast, you called out the wanky protectors, and I took great offense to that because it's already inked on my skin, so I can't agree with you. But I think to me, like being a protector is being the Matt said it right back at the like one of our first interviews. Matt Larson said being the warrior in the room. It's being the person that makes other people safer based upon your presence. And that isn't always being the grey nomad with the bloody 5'11" pants and Oakley sunglasses waiting to kill people. It could be the person who is a kind person to talk to when someone's having a bad day. It could be the person who knows how to do first aid when a child is choking. It could be the person who knows the way to the hospital if someone has a medical emergency. There are so many ways for you to be that protector, and I think the way I rationalize this in my family of women that I'm married to and raising is my role is to be that is to be available to protect when I'm asked to, or when no one else has capacity to. And I think that's sort of my central point, but it's not to interject into someone else's business and to protect them if they don't want the protection. And I would just say there's another piece of context, and we are really at risk of running really long on this one, but it's a topic we could talk about a lot. You don't know whether you intervening in someone else's relationship disturbance might make that significantly worse for that person too. And it's such a hard one. If you don't have any knowledge around domestic violence and what that situation looks like, you might think you're doing the right thing, and every witness and bystander would say you're doing the right thing, but you might get that woman killed, and that's so hard. It is so hard. But and I don't know. Yeah, I've never had to intervene in a situation like that. My heart goes out to those who, for occupational reasons, maybe have had to intervene in those situations. I've certainly worked with a lot of victims after the fact. But there's so much context. And I think probably just to wrap up some of the key points, that context is everything, right? We need to understand where people come from. Women are not just little men. They're not small men. Women come with a whole bunch of different life experience, a whole bunch of different social connections, a whole bunch of different contexts for where the violence in their life is coming from. As you said, it's nearly always a known person, a family member, a trusted person, or a spouse or a romantic partner that is nearly always a culprit, which changes things dramatically when it's not a stranger. The methods of attack are different. The techniques that will work are different. The prevalence of trauma is likely going to be different. All of this is not the same as just running your regular boxer size class. So there's so many points we've talked about. So much of it is self-awareness about where you're at on your journey, reaching out for additional resources. I know personally, Mary will talk your ear off about this stuff if you're willing to learn. Go back and listen to episodes with Tammy Yard McCracken, with Pam Armitage, with Mary, and others that I'm forgetting right now, and I feel awful about later because I'll think of someone that I should have mentioned. Go back and educate yourself. Look at the actual data. Look at the crime stats in your area. Pay attention. It's right there. Everything's publicized now. So
I get castigated for that. Like if somebody is making a point and I'm like, here's the evidence, here's the data, and they're just like, you're always reaching for the data.
Well, what else are you reaching for? Like,
yeah.
If I just reach for the feelings, you call me an emotional woman. So there's so many great points. Mary, I know this isn't the topic of the day, and I do need to get you and Jamie back on to talk about the program you're doing with kids as well. I feel like this is so connected. Can you just give us like a quick snapshot of what this program is for kids as well? Because I think we'll use this as a teaser for a future episode or something, but I think it's really cool what you're doing.
Oh, fab. Yeah. So we've developed a program called Animal Instincts, which is self-protection education for instructors. So basically the idea is you're a martial arts instructor, you kind of know what you don't know, and you want to have something that you can plug in so you can teach effective personal safety skills for kids from 4 upwards. So we have like a 4 to 7 age bracket, 7 to 11 and on, so that it's all age appropriate. kind of stuff. And we've also, here's one for you, we've just released a parenting teenagers safely course, which is just a little short course and a downloadable ebook which helps you with the conflict management, educating them effectively around boundary setting, managing mobile phones, and all of that kind of stuff that looks at teen development and helps you to navigate that safely.
I'll take all the help I can get.
Well, I think you'll be fine with a lot of it because some of it comes down to managing yourself first, which is,
don't worry. I can hold my shit together for an hour on a podcast. Just don't catch me when I'm at the end of my rope. But no, seriously, I mean, this is connected, right? If we want to change, if we want to not have this conversation in a couple of generations, it's going to start with raising good kids, and it's going to start with good boundary setting and respect and all the things that we need to do, and making our kids more confident. So that whether they're sons or daughters, they interact nicely with each other in the future. So. As much as we'll always be fighting the biological battle, we can do some things, and I think starting with children are just another vulnerable population group, right? It's another group that needs specialist education, and I couldn't think of two better people to run with that than yourself and Jamie Clubb. So we'll definitely have another episode and just talking about that particular program. For the sake of plugging something at the end, do you want to talk a little bit about VPAM UK and what you're doing with Chris and where people can book you if they want to hear more of your words of wisdom?
My amazing words of wisdom. Yeah, you imagine people are going to get to this point of the podcast and go, I would never like to see that woman again. She's really, really annoying. Chris and I do workshops, a lot of workshops in school, although we do some workplaces as well. And increasingly, we're getting some women's self-defense bookings too, which is very cool. Violence Prevention and Management UK, as inspired by the work that we've done with you in the past. And a lot of that focuses on the teen demographic, and we go into schools and we spend some time on the preventative stuff. We also hit things, which is fun.
Awesome. And of course, Athena School of Karate, your martial arts school as well. And FairFight. Yep. So what's the FairFight URL?
It's fairfight.nl.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Fairfight.nl. I knew it was something that wasn't .co.uk or one of the familiar ones. So awesome stuff, Mary. I am kind of kicking myself because I would like to continue the conversation. We'll have to do it another time. Hopefully we can do it in person. You're welcome to come out here. I'm also very keen to come back to the UK at some point. So let's get it all happening. But thank you so much, Mary. Any closing thoughts from you before we wrap up?
No, just I'm really excited that Managing Violence podcast is back. I know that sounds like I'm really arse-licking, but genuinely it's such a phenomenal resource for instructors across the world. So yay, that's great. And may I recommend that people check out the back catalogue.
Check it out on YouTube. It monetizes better, just FYI. Or go buy something for one of the companies that are promoted. That's also useful. But anyway, thank you very much for that endorsement, Mary, and thank you for being such a huge supporter of the show for many, many years, and for buying so many books that I've recommended. We can basically use your library as like a proof of concept when I'm trying to get authors on the show. So, look, there's at least one crazy lady that buys a bunch of stuff. Although shout out to Kelly and Darwin, because I know she's also a culprit for that. So yeah. Cool. All right. Thank you very much, Mary. It's been a pleasure. We will talk again very, very soon.
Great. Thanks, Joe.